What if everything you've been through, even the unexpected and unwanted challenges, were preparing you for your next success? If this sounds intriguing, you'll enjoy meeting John DeDakis in this episode. This is the Your Next Success podcast, and I am your host, Dr. Carolyn Sengel. I am a life-first career coach and strategist on a mission to normalize questioning your career, because I believe each of us is made on purpose for a purpose only we can fulfill. The longer we live out of alignment with who we are, what we do best, and why we are here, the more we miss out, and the more the world misses out on what only we can give. The Your Next Success podcast is where we explore how to build a career that truly fuels your life. We talk about self-discovery, smart job search strategies, professional growth, and you will hear stories from people who have navigated big career transitions themselves, so you can create a life-first career and become your own version of authentic success, one that is aligned, meaningful, and truly yours. Joining us now, journalist, novelist, and writing coach John DeDakis. John is a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. During John's 45-year career in journalism, he was a White House correspondent during Ronald Reagan's presidency. John is the author of 6 award-winning mystery, suspense, thriller novels, plus he's a manuscript editor and motivational speaker. John's specialty is helping wannabe writers become published authors. He also inspires people struggling with grief to use writing as a way to find healing. His career was sharing stories of others, and in this episode, you will learn more of his story, including his childhood and the Vietnam-era decision that changed everything. You'll hear tests of his integrity, how grief became his greatest creative fuel, and you will also hear how he walked away from corporate success and said, "I was free, man. I was finally free." This is the story behind the storyteller. Listen for clues into what is possible for your own story. John DeDakis, welcome to Your Next Success. I am just thrilled for the conversation we're about to have.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's good to be here.
You have had such an amazing career and pivots and transitions into who you're becoming, each step building on the last. And I know you now help a lot of people, even in trying to tell their stories and coaching them and utilizing so much of the wisdom and lessons you've learned throughout your career. We'll get to that. And let's start at the beginning. Where were you born? What was life like for the very youngest little John?
My goodness. I was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is right along the Mississippi River at that bend. And it was a great place to grow up. It was a city of about 40 or 50,000 people. So it was big enough so that it wasn't monotonous, but it was small enough that you weren't lost in the shuffle. And my dad was a lawyer. My mom was an elementary school teacher. And I was loved, and I knew it. But I was also privileged, and I don't think I did know that. And I think it took me decades to realize I was born on second base when a lot of people didn't have the right to suit up, much less play the game. So, but growing up was good. That doesn't mean that I had an idyllic childhood, because I was a scaredy cat. You know, I was skinny. My nickname in the neighborhood was Skinny Bones, right? You know, the bullies would pick on me. And I mean, not always. I mean, because I learned quickly that humor is a great way to diffuse any kind of potential problem. And so, I found that it was best to make friends as opposed to, get into fights.
Interesting. And did you have any siblings?
Older sister. My sister Georgia was 8 years older.
Oh, wow. Oh, so did she become a little bit of like a second mom figure almost?
No, I was the bratty little brother. She was brilliant. She could have been a concert pianist. a surgeon. She was, she had a lot going for her. And so in some ways, I had her on a pedestal.
Oh, okay. So your mom was an elementary school teacher. What did she teach exactly? Like a certain grade or?
Third grade. Yep.
Wow. And you then went to school where she was teaching?
No, 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 no.
How'd that work out? Tell us. Yeah. Where
Oh,
did
it
you go to
were
school then?
I
Yeah.
well, I mean, she was at a different school district, and so, but she knew all my teachers,
Of
and
course.
and she would say, if I ever hear anything from your teachers, I'm gonna believe them.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. My dad was a teacher, then a principal, then a superintendent.
Wow,
And so he was always like, there's two sides to a story, and then we'll figure out what, where the truth is.
right. Good for
Um,
him. Yeah, he
yeah,
would have been a good journalist.
he's amazing. He's just great. Yeah, he's an amazing man. He can a mediator, a coach, a mentor, an inspirer, a dad, and still human, all in the same
And I would
realm.
imagine that's one of the reasons you went into doing what you do.
Oh, I mean, I did go in multiple chapters, yes. As far as, he was like, "Girl," because I thought I wanted to be a teacher. I loved the school environment and it was very structured and they had here's what you need to do to get an A, and so I knew what I needed to do to get an A. But I also loved that classroom kind of environment, the teaching and all of those things. And so yes, what I do is partially from my dad's encouragement to not be a teacher. to
But
He
there's
said,
still
"Girl,
but isn't there a teaching component to what you do?
absolutely, yes." And he said, "You do not need to be a trained educator to educate." And I believe that the lifestyle you want to be accustomed to might not be suited for just a straight teaching path. You're good at math, you're good at science, women in STEM is a thing. I highly encourage you to follow those, to chase those things. And in the future, you could always come back and you could always end up doing. And I was like, okay, okay. Yes. So
That sounds like you really had some great, guidance from him.
still,
Yes. Yes.
still,
Well, yeah.
still,
Nice.
still, yes. But many people, their lives and their careers have been shaped positively from his impact. And if I could only do a small fraction of what he's done, the world will be better. So yeah, well, thanks for that. Okay, so we're back to you and your mom being a teacher and keeping track and trying to understand, what you're doing, not doing, and making sure that the story is an accurate one. You're in school, in elementary school, growing up in a beautiful place. Were there particular school subjects that you liked more than others?
Well, I hated math. I'm terrible in math. And I'm
Interesting.
really not good in foreign languages. So those are, science, not so much either. I really was good at, English, social studies, that kind of stuff.
Interesting, interesting. And then outside of school, what kind of things did you enjoy doing?
Playing tennis. I played tennis a lot. And I was also in community theater.
Oh, how did you get introduced to community theater?
When I was I was probably in school plays when even in junior high, but the bug bit when I was a sophomore in high school. And I can't remember exactly how it happened, but I tried out for a play, a one-act play called The Sandbox by Edward Albee. It's theater of the absurd. And I got the part of Granny. And this is before the beard. And
Do tell.
yeah.
How'd that work out?
Oh, and it worked out really well. And I had a little granny voice, and we did state forensic competitions, and so we traveled to high schools all around the state and got an A, first place in the state competition. And so, and the speech teacher George McClendon was, the director for the play, but he was
Ah,
also active in the community theater. And so I also tried out for productions there and, did pretty well, at least during my high school years. Theater is a time suck. And so,
Absolutely.
and so,
Yes.
the more I went along, I didn't have time for it anymore, but I was preparing to go into law and politics. And so theater was, part of the skill set for that because part of politics is theater, it's performance.
Absolutely. Yes. And you can have a story, but then for other people to listen to your story, it needs to be a bit entertaining. So
You
there's that
go.
as well.
All right.
So where did you start, putting this target of you wanted to go into law or politics or something? Because you're talking about in high school, you don't just do high school theater, you're now doing community theater. That's next level up. And at what age and stage did this target of what you thought you wanted to do start shaping?
It started to come together actually when probably I was about, I don't know, 13 or 14. Kennedy was assassinated when I was
Mm.
13. And there was obviously wall to wall coverage. And I became much more aware of journalism. Not that I wanted to be a journalist, but I was aware of politics. And so I would say from probably the age of about, I don't know, 14, 15 until maybe 19 or 20, I was really serious about using the law as a stepping stone to get into politics. And the career trajectory, if it had turned out the way I had intended, I would have been the guy sworn in on the Capitol steps in 2008 instead of that guy from Kenya or wherever Trump says he was from. So, but for the good of the country, I decided to go in a different direction.
There's a lot there. Hold on.
Yeah.
For the good of the country, you
Right.
decided to go.
Well, I'm rethinking that now.
Okay. So, well, I guess from your earliest lens, growing up as a child in Wisconsin, what did you think it was to be a successful adult or a successful member of society? Was there some vision in your mind of this is what it means to be successful, and so therefore this is what I'm going for, or this is what I'm not going to be? Like what?
That's a really intriguing question, and I don't know if I've ever been asked that before because I am pretty sure I'm making this up as I go because I don't think anybody's asked me the question that way before. I never really thought about the word success. But my parents were good role models. And, for me, being successful, even though I didn't use that word internally, would be to, be in a committed relationship, pay the bills,
Mhm.
do what you're good at.
That's fair. Yeah, because we all end up having these like little seeds being planted or little imprints that are guiding us from, one way to another. And it seems like you're growing up loved in a wonderful household with parents who care, respect, or try. They're interested in you in your life. They're trying to give you opportunities and make it possible for you to explore things traditionally and off the traditional path for your own good and betterment as your things are evolving, as you're
You
evolving.
said very well. I mean, there was never pressure to be successful. There was never pressure to make a lot of money. It really, I think I think put it into words really well. To live up to your potential, whatever that happens to be,
And to be you,
to
be
be
the you that
you.
you could be, that you wanted to be, that you saw. And then along the way, this very impactful event in society happens with Kennedy, and you're growing up and you think you have some sort of view of this is how the world works and this is what it means to be respected and this is what it means to be good. And now all of a sudden, this event literally rocks you and causes a slight pivot or a focus in an area.
Yeah, definitely. I was very
Mhm.
focused. Focus is the word.
Okay. Now, as you decided or were trying to decide then what to do after high school, what all went into that and how did you choose where to go?
There I instinctively knew what the skill set was to go into politics. You need to be persuasive. You need to be entertaining. There's a certain degree of showmanship. Um, so there were, and so there were all those things that were in play. And where I went to school, I mean, it was the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I mean, that was my sister had gone there. I don't even think I remember being in the throes of indecision about where am I going to go to school. That was where I was going to
Okay, that
go.
was just and you don't remember if you applied to other places. It's just this is where you're going to go. This is where I can go. This is where I should go. This is my place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then, as you get there, now I'm not as familiar with Wisconsin geography. Did you go live there?
Oh,
And
yeah.
how?
I mean,
Yeah.
Madison was about 150 miles from home.
Okay.
So, I mean, I lived in the dorms and all of that. And that was the beginning of a change because, Madison and the University of Wisconsin, much bigger than La
Yeah.
Crosse. And
Yeah.
even though there were 60 guys on my floor, 2,500 in the dorm complex, I would be in lectures with 500 people. I'd been student council president in high school, so I was a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah.
Now I was a minnow in
Right.
this, and that was also at the time of the Vietnam War, a lot of the campus
Ah.
protests. And so that led to a lot of inner turmoil. Who am I? Why am I here? What's this all about? And that was that was a difficult time in the life of the country as well. I mean, after Kent State, it was like all college campuses literally blew up, and the country was tearing itself apart. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated within months of each other, and
And this is
so
all while you're in college?
yeah.
And we're like, was there a thought or a risk of you could be drafted at any moment? Like, help me understand how did
Interesting. You
that
should.
work?
Yes. Well,
I mean, I
how?
just saw this short over the weekend of this young gentleman going, if you're this, you're going to get drafted for World War III. You're still going to be able to be drafted for World War III, blah, blah, blah. And so now this whole point.
Right, because we've for the last 50 years or so, we've had an all volunteer military.
Right.
And but back in 1969, they instituted a draft, and if you had a draft number below 150, you were going to Vietnam. My number was 14, and it didn't look good. I had a student deferment, so I was safe for a while, but
So tell more about what that is. So your number's basically on the list of you're going sometime. Now the deferment means you get to wait until you're done with school?
I was in school, so that meant I was deferred from the draft. The problem
Interesting.
was that when I was a student at the University of Wisconsin, Playboy magazine made UW-Madison voted it the number one party school in the country. And so it was my mission to be the number. I didn't succeed in being the number one partier, but I got so good at it that my grade point average was 1.95. So I was that close to getting kicked out of school. And
Which would have meant signed up to go now.
Yeah, but so I had joined a campus radio station and covered a riot after Kent State. My parents heard me getting tear gassed on the radio, and so they encouraged me to switch schools, which was fine. I'd had it with all the campus chaos, but I lost 20 credits in the transfer and my student deferment. And so now I'm easy pickings for the draft. But my dad was on the draft board. I go to my
There's a
dad.
draft board?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he was a World War II veteran, a member of Veterans for VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars. And so I went to my dad and I said, Dad, and he knew what was going on. And before I could even finish asking the question, he said, and this is a quote, and the way he said it, he said, "Hell no, I'm not going to get you out of this. Talk to a recruiter and find out what your options are." Because not everybody who's in the military, has to be on the front lines. And so I talked to a recruiter, discovered that they had something called military journalism. Who knew? And so I enlisted to avoid the draft because I'd have more control over what I'd do.
What you got to do.
Yeah.
So you voluntarily sign up knowing that you're going to go one way or the other at this
No,
point.
not necessarily. I don't know if I don't think I knew I was going to go because, we had 250,000 troops in Europe. There were troops in South Korea. I mean, the U.S. military presence, was all over the world, not to mention, in the U.S. as well. But I did get orders to Vietnam. And here's another plot twist. 2 weeks before I was to ship out, my orders were changed to Germany, and I spent 2.5 years at the headquarters of the American Forces Radio and Television Network in Frankfurt, Germany, doing interviews for a special events radio unit. And the first interview I was assigned to do was with this guy named Alfred Hitchcock. Maybe you've heard of him. That was a moment. That was a moment.
Wow. Okay, this is it. All right. But I want to go back to the partying thing too. So you leave this more controlled environment where you're the big fish in a little pond. You now you're a minnow in a huge ocean. You're seeing people on your floor. You're trying to fit in. You're no longer wanting to be one of the skinny kid being made fun of. You've now learned humor is a good way. You now know from theater how to play a role to get you in the part.
Yeah.
And you're wanting to be accepted, and so you start and get it. Like what was the partying entailed? Like, so it's just.
Oh man, look, this was a tough time because I think that a lot of self-doubt. The partying basically meant trying to get laid. Picking up chicks in the bars, and I was no good at it because I was too intimidated. I didn't have any game. I was afraid. I was afraid to approach beautiful young women. I had been able to do that in high school, but it was different. It was just different in that kind of an environment. And so, I had a tremendous inferiority complex. To be honest with you, I actually seriously considered suicide. I was that confused. I didn't, come close to it. I think when I actually started thinking about how I was going to do it, that's when I backed away and go, no, not so much. But that was a very difficult time.
So you're seeking to be in good relationships with people, or to have this attention, and as you're considering all your options, suicide becomes one that was contemplated.
Suicide becomes an option because I was not. I still had the humor, but I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have the inner confidence.
You didn't have the confidence, and you didn't have the purpose or the deeper why of what all this is about?
I had a lot of confusion, just a lot of confusion because, I was, La Crosse, Wisconsin was, Nixon Republican country. It was, conservative and, not ultra conservative, but Madison, you're exposed to just a maelstrom of different opinions, different political viewpoints, different spiritual approaches. And so I hadn't thought about any of that other stuff. And so it was just confusing.
So you just start questioning everything, and at a very important developmental time. And then what got you past those thoughts? I guess maybe in some ways needing to transfer schools or other things
Yeah, you're asking excellent questions because this was a pivotal moment. I mean, this was a time of tremendous confusion and turmoil in the country. And I was in my dorm, and a guy knocked on my door who'd been to law school, and that's one of the reasons I was interested in talking to him. And he was with a group called Campus Crusade for Christ. It was a non-denominational campus Christian organization. Now, I was raised in the Episcopal Church, but by this time I was, as you say, questioning everything. And, his approach was a lot different. Spirituality and religion were put in terms that were more accessible and understandable to me. Now, and so I prayed the prayer, but I don't think I understood what I had really done, because there was about a 2-year interval from that moment to where there was any kind of spiritual coherence to my life. And that didn't happen until I was in the Army. And I would say that for the longest time, there was I would call it a spiritual stability that took place. I read the Bible, it made sense. I was around people who were, attempting to live their lives in a way of integrity, but at the same time had some sort of spiritual understanding. I look back on it now, and I think that you could argue that it was maybe spiritual narrow-mindedness or legalism, dogmatism. I'm not an evangelical anymore, and we can go into that if you want. But but for the longest time, there was stability that was brought about by some degree of spiritual understanding.
Like a little bit of an identity. Now, what is the prayed the prayer? Is this the
That's
knock,
when you
knock,
invite?
knock, do you accept God as your Lord and Savior? Like,
there you go.
Yeah, I grew up Catholic. We've just had prayers all along, right? Like,
yeah.
And it was more of, as a child, my parents decide, as an infant, actually, my parents made the decision, let's baptize her. And then later as a teen, I confirmed, oh yeah, I really do believe this, after learning from the inside out. But yet this evangelical thing is a little interesting, because it seemed
it's very similar. And I mean, the Episcopal Church is very similar to what you described. It was, baptized as an infant, confirmed as a, young person of 13, where you make a conscious decision. But, that's
and then you grow more, and you still get a question. And faith is a journey, right? It's a constant journey, just like life.
And so this, so the prayer was basically acknowledging that I've fallen short of God's perfection. Jesus was perfect and paid the penalty that I deserved, that was meant for me. But his crucifixion and resurrection basically reconciles me with God. And so by praying the prayer, I am
inviting
accepting
God
the
into
gift.
your life.
And
But also it's kind of like we're not perfect. We're never going to be perfect. Perfect is the lowest standard, because it's impossible to attain. So therefore,
Totally.
and I was made on purpose for purpose only I can do in the way that I was, and all my imperfection. And I'm not going to fearmonger that anymore.
Totally. And no one ever, said, if you don't accept Jesus, you're going to hell. I mean, that would have been a non-starter. What really caused me to say yes to this was that Jesus promised that you would have life and have it abundantly. And I was not having an abundant life, because the guy who was talking to me said, this isn't about pie in the sky when you die. This is about having a full and abundant life here and now. And that made it relevant to me.
I gotcha. Okay, so in the midst of questioning, in the midst of uncertainty, someone shows up and is like, "Buddy, you can have it all now, and here's how you get started." And you're thinking, "Well, I'm looking for a way to go in a direction, so why not try this out?" Huh?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now you still end up partying and making some decisions that then lead you to needing to go to another school, that then lead you to choosing on your own where you're going to try to have a little more discernment in that direction of what you're going to do. And then you find yourself in Germany. But how did you, is it because you had done the radio show thing? Like, how did you even get on this journalistic option for the military?
I would say that God, I love the curiosity and the line of questioning. When, again, going back to the early 60s, when I was 12, 13, around that time, I met one of my buddies and I, we were riding our bikes in La Crosse, and we happened to pass by the transmitter of WLCX, AM 1490, the rock and roll, leader in La Crosse. And Jim said, "Hey, let's knock on the door and see if they'll let it show us around." Well, it was a shack. And the only guy there was Pete Lakin, the guy who was the disc jockey, who played, the hits. And so
Yeah.
he showed us around, and it was like, I crossed the threshold into this magical place. And, I would go and visit Pete on weekends and just shadow him, watch him do what he did. So I was already receptive
How
to
old is this?
broadcasting.
How
I was
yeah, how
probably
old?
13, 14, 15 in those years.
Interesting. So right around this Kennedy time frame and kind of during the theater time frame, yet before the community, or maybe right along. Interesting. And this guy, in the midst of his regular job of what he was supposed to be doing, decides it's fun and fine to entertain a couple teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah. He showed us around, and then, Jim he became an ophthalmologist, and, but I was I was fascinated by broadcasting. And so when I was a student at the University of Wisconsin, I volunteered at the campus radio station. So I was a disc jockey there, but also an assistant news director. And so I was covering the riots, but I was also spinning records. And so journalism in the Army was basically the same thing, only, at a major network in Frankfurt, Germany, broadcasting to Central Europe.
So you're writing the story and telling the story both, or you wrote the stories and other people told the stories?
Well, as a reporter, you're going out and getting the information and then doing that.
Yeah. So interesting. Interesting. And how do you decide? This is just a general question. How do you decide what's enough for a story? Because every story is always continuing, even after the story could be finished. The effect of others of the story is but like, where is that discernment of like, this is enough of a lens for a story? Is it a time crunch that makes you choose?
Part of it is time. You've got a deadline, and you've only got so much real estate to tell the story. In broadcasting, you only have so much time. And so, the basic questions are who, where, what, when, why, and how. And so if you've got those answers, then, that's your story. But look, truth, there's capital T truth, everything in reality. And then there's the small t tiles of the mosaic. And so that's what an individual news story is. It's just one little tile in the bigger picture.
In the mosaic. Interesting. Okay, so now how do you go from Germany to, and then what? And if you start off with your first interview there being Alfred Hitchcock, like where does it go from there?
I mean, there were a lot of rock and roll bands. I interviewed the Doobie Brothers and Anne Murray, and so I was doing a lot of rock and roll band interviews. But ended up getting out of the Army, going back to the University of Wisconsin because I hadn't really finished my degree, got my degree in broadcast journalism. And so then I started working at a radio station, and then my first TV job was in Madison at the NBC affiliate. And so that then kind of locked in that journalism was going to be the career, which it was for the next 45 years.
How did you decide along the way which aspect of journalism you wanted to do? Because the people we see on the air as regular consumers, they're not the only people. And like intuitively we know, okay, well, they're talking about cameramen or this or that. But like in a small network, how many people are involved in that show and production and telling?
I mean, television.
And then how did you decide where to go? Like,
Sure.
what's the path?
Okay, good question. It's especially in television, there is a lot going on behind the scenes. It always amazed me that anything at all got on the air because there were so many hoops you had to jump through. But because of my theater background, and that to a certain extent there's that dramatist in me, being a reporter, being on the air was a good fit. And I seem to do pretty well at it. So that's, I think, how I figured that out. But as you go, different organizations are configured differently, and part of what you do is determined by what you're assigned to do. And so over the course of many years, I did different things in journalism.
Yeah, let's get into a little bit more about, and then what happened. And then in any company, there's internal dynamics of who and what and how gets to have whatever position, how that unfold.
Well, when I was at Channel 15 in Madison, the NBC affiliate, usually in local news, you stay 2 years in a place and then you go to the next bigger market. At Channel 15, it was a good place to be. It was a really solid news organization. I stayed there 8 years, and I was probably one of the, there were people who stayed there much longer than I did. But there, and I was doing more documentary type stuff, in-depth reporting, but there was not really the appetite there for that. And so I needed more depth in my reporting. And someone that I was working with suggested, "Well, you ought to go to the Christian Broadcasting Network." And I had no idea what that. I take that back. One of the guys I was in the Army with had been an announcer at CBN, and so Pat Robertson was the head of the network. He founded it. It was the 700 Club, and
Yep.
they had a news organization that was just getting organized, just getting in place. So I applied there. I was impressed with the place, and of course I didn't want to get hired, because of my spirituality. So I took all the God words out of my resume, and of course got rejected, bam, immediately, because I didn't measure up to what HR
You weren't
was looking
aligning to
for.
what they wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
interesting.
the day I got my rejection, I called my friend Mike Little he was now back at the network, not in the Army anymore. And it turns out Mike wasn't just an announcer, he was the executive vice president in charge of the news division. So as soon as he knew that I got rejected, he says, "Well, it sounds like personnel's not using very good judgment," because he knew my work. And so, long story short, I got hired. And within 2 years, they made me White House correspondent. But this was right at the time that my boss, Pat Robertson, was running for president. So that's a potential conflict of interest. You're trying to cover the guy who pays your check, your paycheck.
Imagine what your life would be like if your career aligned with who you are, what you do best, and actually fueled the life you want. At Next Success, we support all ages and stages through career transitions, from students exploring majors or careers to job seekers actively searching or reimagining their next move to professionals committed to self-awareness and leadership growth. Stay connected and explore what's possible at nextsuccesscareers.com and follow Next Success Method on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook.
And where was the location of this? The CBN?
CBN is headquartered in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and so I was a general assignment reporter there for 2 years, and then they reassigned me to cover the White House in D.C.
So you were Wisconsin, Germany, Wisconsin, Virginia.
Yeah.
Where and this is now career path wise. What was happening on the personal life wise and the quest for a female person who would give you attention?
Oh, well, I mean,
what's happening there?
Oh, well,
let's catch us up on the other side too.
Yeah. Oh, that. Well, I was when I became, an evangelical Christian, I became much more responsible. and moral, I guess you could say. I had made a lot of mistakes as a hedonistic, pleasure-seeking kid, and I'd caused a lot of pain to people to the women in my life. And so I was learning a new way of relating to people. And so I met my wife. I joined the church choir just to get involved. This is back in
Oh, wow.
Madison.
Yep.
Joined the church choir, not because I'm any kind of great shakes musically, but because that I thought was a good way to get involved. And a year after I joined the choir, this young woman named Cindy Brown, who had been a choir director at a Lutheran church near Madison, became our new choir director. And it was about my age, also single, not bad looking. We clicked, blah blah blah. And so by the time so we got married within 9 months after we met. I proposed after 6 months, and we're
And
still
is this
together 48 years later.
Oh, this is amazing. Okay. So, and then did you meet her when you went back after being in Germany, or did you meet
Yeah.
her before you went to Germany?
No, I met her in 77, so I was already a reporter at Channel 15. I was, my life was stabilizing by this time. And
How old are you
I was
roughly?
27 then, and
Oh,
she was 4 months younger than me, and so I was really at this point I was actually looking for a wife. It was no fun playing the field anymore. I needed something long term.
and so then she moves with you
Yeah, I mean
as you get this opportunity. And then what did she do along the way as you kept getting other opportunities? Did
well
she still stay as choir director?
I met her when she was working on her doctorate in choral conducting, choir directing,
Interesting.
basically.
Yeah.
But she wanted to teach at the college level. And so she got her master's, but then she discovered she had to get her doctorate as well. And she wasn't as enamored with that idea. So when we got married, she decided to teach public school. She had taught public school music. And so she went
Interesting.
back to teaching public school. Probably 2 years after we got married, the first kid came along. And so um, she decided to stay at home, even though she made more money than I did she made more money as a teacher than I did as a reporter, which is saying
What's
a lot.
wrong with the world, right?
Oh my God,
Like,
who
is
switched the
that
price
still the
tags?
case now?
Yeah,
Like, is
yeah,
that still the case now?
yeah.
Or journalists paid? I mean, because
Well, it depends on
teachers
where
are
you
not
are.
paid related to the impact and the lives that they're doing.
Absolutely.
And I'm a little bit shocked to hear that journalists were paid less.
Well,
And
I
yet
mean,
that's the way, even in that time, like that's the way anyone was getting their info. There
well,
wasn't this swipe left, right, search, search, search. You had to rely.
well,
And
it
how it with the
depends.
people. Yeah.
It
Tell me.
depends on where you're working. I mean, journalists make a lot of money depending on what they do. If you're an anchor, you're making, you're top dog, so
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
making the most money. I wasn't an anchor. I was a reporter. And so, there's a vast pay range within journalism. But, we made the decision, and it wasn't like, Cindy, you're going to stay home with the kids. I'm not that kind of guy.
Yeah.
But she felt that these are irretrievable years. And so she felt that it was important for her to be home with Emily as opposed to, being the mom to 25 other kids.
Mm. And then how many children did you guys end up having?
3 altogether.
3. Wow. Okay. So Emily's born, you're a reporter, you're in Virginia. Then there's the whole like you could be a White House correspondent, but now you can't because your boss is going to run for
Oh,
president.
no,
Now that's
I could. I was definitely a White
Oh,
House correspondent.
so
But
tell
that,
me, yes, how did this go? How did this pivot then?
well,
With all these things.
it was definitely difficult because this is before Fox News, but CBN, their news division, felt that the news media was hopelessly liberal, and so it was our job to counter that by being conservative. And that was not the way I was trained as a journalist.
Yeah, I'm like, That kind of seems a little bit
My
like,
my argument
yeah.
was two wrongs don't make a right, dude. So I was trying to play it straight, but I was in an organization where the pressure to be conservative was intense. But it was not relentless, but it was an uphill battle. And I mean, I did an interview with Pat before he actually decided to run for president. And to be fair, I mean, it was a tough interview, but he didn't, try to shut it down. He didn't try to, you know, take control over that. He actually called us his runaway news division. But
Oh,
it was difficult. It was difficult because the perception was, that we were carrying political water for our boss. And
interesting.
yeah, so it was
What
difficult.
and aside from just being technically difficult, how did that like feel or manifest, or how did you experience that, knowing it's difficult? Like, did it, like, was there an internal, there was a time where it's like how I was aligned and how the larger organization that was aligned, I hadn't discerned enough of who I was, what I actually believe, what I actually value, and yet in the same moment my body was experiencing all sorts of stress and things that now looking back it's like, aha, it was that,
Yeah.
and it felt like this and it was like that.
Well,
But
I mean,
and then I was angry, but
I
like, what
was
was it for
angry. I
you?
was angry
Yeah.
a lot. I mean, I was angry a lot because I felt that, we needed to play it straight. And so, on the one hand, I was concerned about, the perception that I wasn't a fair minded journalist. And on the other, I was angry that I was being pushed in a direction that would cause me to try to make my copy persuasive as opposed to informative. And so
Ah,
long story short, I ended up leaving on my own and went to CNN. Amazingly, CNN didn't consider me to be damaged goods. They hired me in Atlanta to be a writer, and I was at CNN for 25 years, and that was, that's that at the time was the holy of holies of journalism. 24-hour news. While I was there, basically CNN got on the map as the
yeah.
go-to place for, responsible journalism.
And I appreciated CNN. I think when I was in college and had cable, I really appreciated that CNN was there, and I really appreciated headline news because I
Yeah.
thought, well, here we go. Every half hour,
Yep.
regardless what time I'm getting up or whatever, I'm
Yeah.
going to flip this on, and I'm going to know in 30 minutes if the world is still the world, and
There
then I'm
you
going to
go.
go about my
Good for you. Yeah,
my day
exactly.
and
Yep.
see.
Yep.
And plus, if I am not incorrect, Robin Meade,
Yep.
I remember hearing her on the radio in Ohio while growing up, and then it was just like, "Wait, what? I've heard this woman
Yeah.
speak before." Now she's a how interesting is that? So, yeah,
Yeah.
that was a
Oh, I
nice
mean,
thing. But you
she's
weren't on.
she's rock
Yeah,
she's rock solid.
yeah. And so what parts of CNN did you impact in your career there? Like, I know there was a big entity there, but there's many components of that. So as you first started, where are your stories being told? Are they only told on the main things, or are they told on headline news? Like, what? How?
No, headlines was basically a different company within a
Yeah.
company. So I was with CNN CNN headquarters in
Yep.
Atlanta, and at least in the initial years, writing for the main newscasts. And at least before the Gulf War, it was an assembly line. I mean, I worked on a lot of different shows, but then after the Gulf War, they went to a show-based model where each show 2-hour time block had its own editors, writers, producers, anchors, all that kind of stuff. And so I worked on the early morning newscasts. Carol Costello was the anchor that I was her editor, and we worked together for a long time. And then I went to DC, and the last 7 years I was one of Wolf Blitzer's editors on the Situation Room. So that, and the impact. I mean, I was sort of a mentor, I suppose. I was older than a lot of the the people in the newsroom, in DC. I taught people how to write broadcast copy. And so, there was a teaching component that was there as well. But it's a big place. So I'm a cog in this big machine.
And also, you kind of in this becoming and evolving, it ended up being you're reporting the story, you're writing the story and reporting the story to now you're writing that story that somebody else is reporting. Did you consciously choose that? Because that you're going from being this on the stage playing the part, on the camera telling the story, to then now more behind the scenes, still very important, but not having the limelight. Like, how was
Yes,
that?
that was
Was it
hard.
conscious? Yeah,
Yes,
was it
it was
conscious, or
hard.
that's just where you fit?
I mean, they hired me as a writer because that was the job that was open. I had applied to be a correspondent, and Ed Turner, not any relation to Ted Turner, basically said, well, we don't have any openings for correspondence, but writing is a noble, calling, so consider that. And so I got hired as a writer, but CNN did a lot of hiring from within. And so I applied to a lot of correspondent positions. They actually made me an anchor for, sort of weekend cut-ins, overnight cut-ins, just to kind of see if I would be able to handle it. But I was doing overnight, so I was dead tired most of the time. So,
Yeah.
I didn't really have the energy to be,
Yeah.
an anchor per se. And it just seemed as though every on-air opportunity that came along, somebody else got it. And that was
Uh-huh.
discouraging. And so I actually, I made a decision, and Cindy and I talked about this, where, the on the air opportunities weren't there, but I was already, the family, we had a mortgage, we had
Right.
kids. So, and I was getting older. So it was not as easy to just jump ship and go someplace else and take
I
a
see.
big pay cut. And so I made Cindy and I together made a conscious decision. I'd bloom where I was planted and do the best I could as an editor. Because I was no longer a writer. They made me an editor. And so that was more responsibility. It was a middle management kind of position. And
Did it
so,
have
go
did
ahead.
it have set hours? Were they predictable? Are editors working predictable hours which actually feed into
Yeah. There,
developing the family?
yeah, there was, and that's a really important consideration. Yes. It was a regular straight shift. It was overnights, which sucked. But on the other hand, I was working, um, when I left work, that was when 5 extra layers of management came in. And so when we were on the overnight shift, it was a bare bones operation, but we thrived because we all knew what we were doing. We didn't need Mr. Big and Mrs. Big and all those others to tell us what to do. We did it. And so there was stability because, we had vacation time. I had a life outside of the job. It's when I first started writing fiction, and so yeah, it was possible to live in that environment and not get shot out of a cannon whenever big news broke and they'd send me to hither and yon. It was stable.
What were the hours then? Was it overnight all the time?
Pretty much. I mean, within a year after I got there, they made me an editor. I mean, the guy I worked with said, I was working nights and weekends, and he said, "Have you ever thought about being an editor?" And I said, "No." He said, "You'd be a great editor." What he meant was, I want off nights and weekends, and you'd be a great warm body to replace me. And so he got the 9 to 5 shift, and I did overnights for, I'd say, probably 17 years. Uh,
Wow. So what is
I
that,
know.
like 7 to
Well,
7, 10 to 7? Like what is that? Like,
it means sleep deprivation. I would go into work depending on the the hours were flexible depending on the era, but often it was I'd go in at like midnight or 1 in the morning
wow.
and get off at like 8 in the morning. And I'd go home and I'd sleep for as long as I could. Cindy was at work, the kids were in school, and I discovered that I could only sleep for 8 hours and then I was up. But normal people go to bed and then get up and go to work. So I'd go to bed at 9 at night and I'd get about an hour and a half sleep. I'd set the alarm and then put it across the room, so I had to get up to turn it off, and then I'd
I
go
still
in.
do that.
Yeah, and I one of my friends is a neurologist and specializing in sleep deprivation. And I remember asking him, I said, "Don't you have to have, a full 8 hours of sleep?" And he said, "No, you have to have REM sleep, dream sleep." And I said, "Well, I get that." And I said, what does it mean if I can sleep for 25 minutes and wake up refreshed?" And he said, "It means you're a good napper." And so I never worried about sleep after that. My body pretty much told me when it was time to sleep, and it's still the case. I mean, I've been retired since 2013, but I still get up at like, 2, 3 in the morning. I got up today
Oh,
at 3 in
wow.
the morning, and I've only had 2 cups of coffee. That'll probably be it. And,
Yeah.
um, and I'll take cat naps, but I get a lot done. Sleep is overrated.
I- Interesting. Interesting. Okay. And so in this schedule, yeah, because it's like there's always these things that like I'm thinking like, wait, what? Editors are working overnight? Well, that makes sense because when you refresh in the morning, it's like, okay, all right, that makes sense. Okay. All right. And now how does this play into your ability to you end up having 3 children. What are their difference in ages? And does that all like Emily was up in Virginia, then did the others come in Atlanta and how like yeah.
Emily actually was born in Wisconsin, and then we
Oh, born with
moved.
it, then went
We
to yep,
then we
okay.
then we moved to Virginia Beach. Then James came along, and he's 2.5 years younger than Emily. And then we moved to Atlanta, and probably a year after I started in Atlanta, Stephen was born, and he's 5 years younger than James and 8 years younger than Emily.
Okay. And so while they're in school, you're sleeping. They come
Yeah.
back from school, and then are you like the fun dad until you go to bed, or like what
I don't know if
happens?
I was fun, but I was the dad, and yeah, I mean, I felt that it was important when I went into journalism and met Cindy. I had wanted to cover the White House for CBS, and when I got married, I just knew that that was not a realistic goal because, the divorce rate in journalism is huge. And,
I didn't know that. I
yeah,
didn't know.
and
Well, aside from, somebody that was a journalist and now is a secretary of
yeah,
conflict. But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
other than that, I didn't really
So
know.
I made a conscious decision that I was going to do my best not to take the job home. And so
Oh,
I was very fortunate that I was there for the kids. I was, Cindy's coach for each birth. And so I was not an absentee dad, and she and I were a good team.
okay. And did they know what you did? Like, did you go to school days and tell about what you did
Yeah. Oh,
at
yeah.
work?
And,
Yep.
the interesting thing is they didn't know how I voted. At CNN, you were not allowed to contribute to political campaigns. You couldn't have bumper stickers or walls or yard signs or anything like that because didn't want to convey the perception, that your copy is, that you're trying to influence an election. And so they didn't know how I voted.
I think that's a good thing though, right?
Yeah, it's
Because
definitely a
you're
good thing.
developing, and I think that was part of the draw of what I really enjoyed about CNN was the telling of the facts of the story, and you get to make your own decision about where to go from there.
Journalism is
You know,
changing a lot, and CNN's changed too.
it's all changing. The world is changing. Everything's changing, and anybody is now a reporter, right?
Right. Oh,
Regardless how
if you've got
credible
a
or not
phone,
credible.
and you hit send or post, you're a publisher. But there's no
Yeah,
editor on your shoulder going, "Where'd you get that? How do you know that's true?" So,
right.
social media, the internet is just awash with BS.
And it's I think, very difficult for the generation growing up now to try to understand who to trust or what is a source and what is that and how does that
Yeah.
matter. I mean, so I'm
Yeah.
seeing it in my own family with the kinds of things that you
I'll
can
make
eat
a
this, you can't eat
suggestion.
that, we can do this.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'll make a suggestion because it is still possible to get factual, reliable news. And I would suggest go to the Associated Press or Reuters. Both are wire services that have been around for a long time. In the case of AP, at least 150 years. And it's fact-based. And
I
there's
like that. Yep.
editorial oversight. The Reuters is based in the UK, so you've got a more international perspective there. And there are plenty of other responsible news organizations, but those are two,
Yeah.
and they
Yep.
play it straight. You don't have to watch Fox or CNN or MS Now or any of these to get the facts.
And
C-SPAN,
sometimes
go to C-SPAN and watch a hearing if you've got the time, or if you can, see the taped replay.
I do like watching hearings every now and then. I think those are, it's nice to see. And I think during COVID to watch some of the hearings and then to see on the news the different, I'm like, wow, I watched that and that didn't happen and interesting. Well, that's it. But thank you for this reminder. Now, AP, okay, in my ignorance, I thought it was, this is, and please correct me, this is a big news organization that goes out and tells stories, and they put it out there, and little news organizations can run that story too.
Yeah,
True.
exactly.
Okay.
So some
Associated
get
Press
picked
up because you would see like in the newspaper, AP, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Right. I mean, that's that AP, and to a lesser extent UPI are staples of any local news organization, even international news organizations, because AP is everywhere, and so news organizations subscribe to AP because that supplements their own reporting.
Who funds the AP?
Usually news organizations subscribe to it, and
To
so
have a part.
so
Okay.
you can subscribe without having to pay for it.
Oh, that's it. No, I'm just saying, like, because, larger news entities, CNN, Fox, whatever, right?
Right.
They have bought into their network, their agenda, deviating away sometimes from true journalism, and they're paying to have this thing. So now AP has to be funded from somewhere. It's just funded from individual subscribers or news subscribers, and that's enough to keep it unbiased.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that
Okay.
you're asking a question that's beyond my scope of understanding, but
Mine
they
too.
do have subscribers,
Yeah.
and you got a lot of news organizations that subscribe.
Yeah. Beyond my understanding too, but I it's just like, oh, somebody somewhere is paying to allow the story to come out, and that person
I would
paying
have to
may or may not have an
yeah.
agenda.
I mean,
It's
I've
just an
got AP
interesting
on
thing.
my phone, and they probably have advertising on there as well.
Oh, probably. Yeah, probably. Okay. All right. So this is cool. You're in Atlanta, you're working overnights, you're contributing to journalism and true journalism of here's the facts, let other people make their decisions, being on pretty big shows. But then what happened in 2013 that you decide, nah?
Well, I got old.
Did you decide? Was it by choice or by force or by
Oh
influence?
my. Wow. Well, you're going deep here. Look, by the time you get to 2013, I'm getting old, and a lot has happened. Probably the most fundamental, earth-shaking thing was my son's death. Stephen died of a heroin overdose in 2011, and that rocked my world. And I went through grief counseling for 2.5 years. CNN was very supportive, but I went back to work, and journalism wasn't fun anymore. And then Sandy Hook comes along. Sandy Hook is where a guy goes into the elementary school and slaughters 20 elementary school kids. And my job,
my kid was a kindergartner.
yeah.
My oldest
my
was a
God.
kindergartner.
Oh, that must have been awful for you.
And it was nowhere near me, and yet it just started. And then my child, then they started having the gun drills, and then my kid came home and told me we had a gun drill. Don't worry, I sat in the back, so if a bullet comes, it'll hit them before it gets to me. And just to think, this is what this 5-year-old is thinking and deciding
Well,
what?
my job
Oh,
at CNN was,
yeah,
watching parents cry over their dead kids, and so that was when it what was not fun anymore. And so
yeah.
it wasn't long after that that I decided it was time to move on. And I'd already written, I think, four novels, and
Written
all
and
of that.
published them?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, my first novel
Okay.
came out 20 years ago. And
Okay.
and so it's a series, and my protagonist is a young woman in her 20s, and she begins finding the body of the aunt who raised her from infancy. So grief and loss are part of her character as the series unfolds. So I'm processing grief, my in fact my we
Of
didn't
all the
get into this.
stories, how did you choose this as your novel? How did you choose this as the focus of your like you of all, you could have told you by this point you've been and heard and seen and witnessed and told many, 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 many stories. How did grief become the focus?
Because my sister took her life in 1980. And so Cindy and I had only been married a couple of years. I was still a reporter in Madison. And it wasn't probably when I first started writing fiction, it wasn't for another 15 years, but that was already part of my life.
Story.
Yeah, my story. And so when I started to write, I discovered, just because that's the way my creative mind worked, is you mine the pain. You go for that. And so I was processing my own grief through my protagonist.
Of writing the story.
Yeah.
Okay. So your sister, who you put on a pedestal, who you
Yeah.
very much looked up to,
Yeah.
this rocks your world and writing becomes an outlet,
Yeah.
different, not directly related, but an outlet for that grief and processing. And then I can't even imagine with your son.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're so now there's just certain points of life that you can't go back to who you were.
Right. Right. It changes you. Grief changes you.
And in the midst of this, how do you choose to take one step forward anyway? I mean, as a teen, you already start questioning, who am I? What am I? Why am I here? What is the point? Two people you love the most, but like what kept you taking a step on this side?
Again, a really good question that I don't think anybody's asked quite that way. I think that I'm enough of a realist because as a journalist, you see people on their worst day of their life. My dad fought in World War II. He helped liberate one of the concentration camps. So, I have no illusions about what life can deal you. There are no guarantees that you're going to be immune from pain and loss and death. And, the Kennedy assassination, MLK. I mean,
Right.
that's part of day-to-day journalism. And
Even
so,
Jesus, like everybody dies. Why are we
yeah,
doing this? Like,
yeah, life's not fair.
no,
And
yeah.
so I guess it's you just it that's the I guess the answer to your question, I don't think it's particularly profound, is that we all have the same amount of time, and we can only live it one moment at a time. And so one moment leads to the next and leads to the next, and they go by 1 second at a time. So the pace sets itself, and so you learn just to manage it one step at a time, and you can only control that moment. We
Mhm.
spend all our time regretting the past or fearing the future, but we can only really control the moment.
Right. Okay. And so you leave, and then what?
Leave what?
Well, you left after 20, so
Oh,
you leave
left CNN.
CNN.
I left
You leave
CNN.
CNN. You've now have you and you had already started, some would say a side hustle,
Oh yeah,
of
it was what it was.
writing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because by this time, when I published my first novel, traditionally published, I'd go to a writers' conference, and someone would say, because now I've got credibility, and these are a lot of people who are trying to get published, And so there was one guy who comes up to me and says, "Here's my 150,000 word tome. Give it a quick read and tell me what you think." Well, with me, there's no such thing as a quick read, and "it needs work" isn't going to be that very helpful. So I monetized it. And so I started to accept jobs, manuscript editing. I would give people, they'd pay me to edit their stuff. I would lead writing workshops at writers' centers, writing conferences. I started to coach people one-on-one. So by the time I left CNN, I was a novelist, I was a writing coach, I was a manuscript
Interesting.
editor, I
Yeah,
was a teacher. So I had all of these irons in the
already.
fire. Yeah.
Mm. And so it's more choosing where to focus your time
Yeah.
versus leaving something
Oh
else.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was free, man. I was finally free to do, to not be at the mercy of the news cycle, but to really be able to do what I was good at and be able to be entrepreneurial about it, to basically set my own hours, set my do the things I am good at and love.
And help with the stories that you choose, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're
Yeah.
writing your own or whether you're choosing to work on helping somebody else's bring that to fruition, you are completely in control of your own
As much
time
as
schedule,
possible. As
etc.
much as possible. I mean, Cindy still wants me to take out the trash, damn it. You know.
Okay. And so I guess yeah, yeah. So how has this evolved and become like this is so I always find it so fascinating. But yet anything that's given to you as a challenge, an opportunity, an adverse experience, you're still picking up the little tiles of the mosaic and making it into a beautiful story.
Trying to. Yeah.
This is beautiful. This is beautiful. Okay, so now how do you choose to spend your time? Not in spend, but how do you choose to invest your time? What captures your attention these days?
Well, the great thing is that Cindy and I are both basically retired, so we hang out. I get
Oh,
up.
that's
I
cool.
think I get up around 3 in the morning. Cindy sleeps later, and so I come down here and work. I journal. I journal every day for probably at least a half an hour. So that's my writing. And
Yeah.
then, I'm fielding emails, I'm editing, I'm writing. And then around 8, she's ready for coffee. And then we go up and hang out and read and do the New York Times puzzles and talk and, all that kind of stuff. And then I'm back down here in the afternoon. And, around 7 o'clock, we have dinner together and then watch, probably The Pit or something on TV. And, yeah. And then the cycle repeats itself.
So now and from this vantage point, like how do you define authentic success for you?
Oh, I mean, it's not being famous. It's not making a lot of money. Those two things I think can be a trap. So for me, success is doing what you're good at and what you love. Period.
Mm, mm. And with who you love
Yeah.
seems as well. That's the
Oh,
other.
absolutely. In fact, the most recent novel, Enemies Domestic, we wrote it together. I mean, I was the writer, but we came up with the idea together. I did the writing, and then she was my alpha reader. Every
Oh,
every
nice.
chapter I wrote, I would take it up. She'd give me notes. We'd talk about it, and then that gave us enough light for the next step, and so on.
Oh, what a beautiful just
Yeah,
evolution of partnership and
yeah.
giving and growing together. That's quite beautiful. Okay.
I'm a lucky
So
guy.
how well, I think yeah, you're both lucky, right? You chose each other and love is a feeling and a choice.
It's
Um,
more of a choice than a feeling.
yeah.
There comes anybody who's been married for any length of time will tell you there comes a point where the bloom is off the rose, and that's when you have to make love a choice.
Yes.
And yet, what I've discovered over 48 years is the more you make that choice, the warm fuzzies can return. They're just different,
Yes.
deeper.
Yes. 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 This is so good. Okay. How do people find you now? How do people work with you? Because you mentioned a variety of things that capture your attention and how you help people.
Best way to do that is through my website. Everything kind of gets funneled through there. It's my name.com, johndedakis.com, JOHNDEDAKIS, Sam.com, johndedakis.com. You can get through to me by send a message. It's got my books, my speaking, my teaching, the different, events that I'm going to be involved in. A lot of them are online. I do a lot of speaking now, teaching. So it's a one-stop shopping for however you want to interface with me.
Awesome. Thank you just so very much, John, for telling
Thank
more of
you.
your story, for being on the podcast and sharing all these kind of twists, turns, pivots. And it's just a beautiful creation that you've brought into the world for sharing so many other people's stories, as well as your novels and your transformation into challenging times to helping others. So genuinely appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome, Carolyn. And thank you for such, probing, logical, important questions.
Thank you.
John, thank you for your honesty, your humor, and for showing us what it looks like to keep choosing yourself as you navigate your next success. Thanks for listening to Your Next Success with Dr. Carolyn Sengel. Remember, authentic success is yours to define and includes aligning your career to support the life you want.